Which wine myths really should be forgotten so that we can get down to enjoying wine all the more? Can you actually smell if a wine is sweet? And why do we struggle so much to find the words to describe wine? Well, you're going to get the tips and stories that answer those questions in today's chat. But before I introduce our guest, just let me say, if you're watching this video on the replay, please get into the comments and type the word replay. Let me know where you're logging in from and what's in your glass. And of course, if you're here on the live stream, I want to hear from you as well. You've just joined one of the most passionate groups of wine lovers who gather every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine. I'm Natalie McLean. I teach online wine and food pairing classes. And I'm live streaming this video for the first time, but it's based on a recording that we made for my podcast, Unreserved Wine Talk. And but I'll be here with you on the live stream in the comments. So get in there, let us know, what questions do you still have? What tips or stories are you enjoying? I want to hear from you. Now, before I introduce our guest, let me just say that two of you are going to win a copy of his terrific new book, A Cynic's Guide to Wine. This is unlike anything I've ever read. It's terrific. So all you have to do is email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com and let me know that you'd like to win a copy, and I'll choose two people randomly from those who do that. All right, back to our guest. Sunny Hodge is the founder of two multi-award-winning wine bars in London, England. He is also an international wine judge for the IWSC, very prestigious, as well as Decanter. He writes for Waitrose Food Magazine and has been a wine expert and commentator for the Evening Standard, The Times, The Guardian, Food FM, Monocle Radio, and ITV's Love Your Weekend. His new book is The Cynic's Guide to Wine, which delves into the science of wine from soil to flavor, dispelling so many wine myths along the way. And he joins us now from his wine bar, Aspen and Meursault in London. Hey, Sunny, so good to have you here with us. Welcome.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Natalie.
Awesome. So, hey, just before we dive in, I get Meursault, that's, famous Burgundian wine, but what's Aspen refer to with your wine bar?
So, Aspen and Meursault is a natural wine bar, and I wanted this juxtaposition between the connectivity of nature and the disconnect of mankind. So, bizarrely, Meursault is not the wine region. It's a character from a book that Albert Camus wrote called L'Étranger, or The Stranger, if you've heard of it. Mm-hmm. If so,
okay, so we're gonna this is not gonna be a light and fluffy conversation.
Oh no.
I love it though. I love it.
Yeah, long story short, his main character, Meursault, was very disconnected from mankind, and Aspen, the trees are all connected under roots, so I wanted something that signified mankind looking at nature, not understanding the connection, and then us realizing, wow, it is all connected and it all plays together. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Holy smokes, just in the name of the restaurant, or the wine bar itself. Wow, okay, so this isn't your regular Cowboys Ranch wine bar. Okay, we're going to get into all this because you have a fascinating background. But before we dive into your wine bar, you are a remarkable street skater. Now, I watched a video of you, I'm going to say roller skating, that's probably not the right term, but people might understand better what I'm saying. From one rooftop of a building in London to another, and other sorts of breathtaking feats. I mean, what got you into that?
When I was at school, I hated sports. I hated football, and I was like, this is not for me. And my mom was an athlete; she was a professional athlete, and I was like, well, I want to do sports.
Oh, what sport, by the way? She was an athlete.
She competed in 400-meter hurdles, so she competed nationally
in the Olympics, right?
In the Olympics as well. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was at a time where my mom was super sporty, and then I was like, I don't like any of the normal sports. And I got into skateboarding, and I found my way into rollerblading, is what they call it. And I was like, this is me. And you meet a range of people from all types of backgrounds, different cultures, growing up in London through skating. And that was me. Yeah, I loved it.
That's fantastic. We'll put a link to the video in the show notes that people
Oh
can see
no.
it. It's wild. This is not your regular rollerblading. Oh, yes. No, it's very impressive, Sonny. Oh, my goodness.
Thank
Do you
you.
still do it?
As much as my body allows me.
Do you still roller skate? Okay. Things change as you age. Yes, absolutely. Though you're not very old. Is it true you were shot in London? What happened?
It is true. I mean, growing up in London, especially spending so much time rollerblading on the streets, you're exposed to all different types of people, and being shot, I guess, is one of the things that happened. I've been maced as well, all robbery related, because London streets, I guess, similar to many capitals, they're not the safest places in the world. So yeah, getting shot was amongst one of many, let's say, colorful things that happened to me growing up.
So were they trying to rob you, or were robbers running out of the bank and you got accidentally shot? How did it happen?
They were trying to rob my friend. So we finished up in a skating session in Peckham, and Peckham is, back in the day especially, a notoriously dodgy area. And my good friend, we used to call him Portuguese John because his English was very limited. These guys had come up and try to take his phone. It became a little bit of a scuffle. I managed to get the phone back. I was never particularly strong, but I was like quick and nimble. So I got the phone back. John gets his phone. He runs on a bus, and now I'm on my own. And these kids come back with like an air rifle of some sort for killing animals. And then yeah, it all played out. So then I was soon in hospital.
My goodness.
Yeah.
An air rifle, does that have bullets? Like, is there lead bullets in an air rifle?
Yeah, they're meant for like killing little animals. So I got one in the back of the head, one in the jaw, and they had to remove it surgically. Yeah, the guys actually got caught. I think they got done for attempted murder or something like that. But at the time, I was out of the country, and I was like, leave it be, like let it go. So I think, they're still out there. I hope they learned some lesson.
Well, let's hope. And so, did this affect your ability to smell? Like when it comes to, I'm going to lasso everything back to wine, of course. But, did it have any connection for you?
I'm told no, but I have severe memory issues. But I've always had it. So I've actually been to a few clinical neurologists to better understand how my memory works. And through all those neurological testings, I have discovered that I'm unaffected by the incident. So no is the short answer to that. Luckily.
Okay. Yes, luckily. Do you have a memory of the smell of lead or that shot? Anything like that?
Yeah,
because
so I think
I imagine it's tied to some big emotions for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think this, you're tying it back a little bit with the book, which is really cool, which brings up the question can we smell metals? And that again ties in with ideas of terroir, and when we have rocks in the soil, can we actually smell them? Do they have a link with wine? So I guess the smell of that sort of singeing metal quite close to my nose and in my head really brought back a lot. But also it is infused with emotion. But then the question is, did I actually smell the metal, or was I smelling something else?
And which was it?
Well, tying back to ideas of terroir, we can't smell or taste metals. There's no way that we can do it. We can smell some geological materials like salt and some minerals, but most minerals and metals we're unable to smell and taste. And those metals that we feel that we can smell and taste, so I'm talking when you have a coin, like a dollar coin or the equivalent, and then you put it in your fingers and it has a really distinct smell. But that's actually a tertiary influence of our oils reacting with those metals. So a freshly minted coin has no smell, but as soon as we touch it, as soon as we interact with it and our oils start breaking it down, then we smell those reactions. So technically metal and most other minerals except for salt don't have smell or taste.
That's fascinating. And what about that smell? I love the word, I think it's called petrichor. It's
Yeah.
that spring rain hitting fresh rocks or whatever. And after the air clears, that smell in the air, they say it's petrichor. What is that?
Petrichor is the byproduct of soil bacteria. So it's literally like little bacterium in the soil making a compound called geosmin. And geosmin is a compound, an aroma compound that's directly related to these earthy smells. So even like beetroot's quite earthy, that's full of geosmin. And geosmin is simply part of the chemical family of terpenes that are used as animal and insect attractors and detractors in nature. So this bacteria creates this geosmin under certain conditions, especially when it's been quite dry. They start creating it, and as soon as you have rain that hits, all of that geosmin is made volatile, and then we can smell it, and that is the smell of petrichor.
That's great.
It's cool.
Geosmith, how do you spell it?
Geosmin, geosmin.
Yeah. Oh, geosin. Okay. And terpenes you mentioned. I
Yeah.
hear that all the time. Are those aroma molecules or precursors to aromas?
They could be both. So you have bound
Okay.
terpenes and unbound terpenes, free terpenes. So terpenes
What are they
are
bound to?
in a wine, they can be bound to many things, but in a wine context, they're largely bound to glucose molecules. So like the family of terpenes, as we mentioned, are a huge variety of aroma compounds used within nature to signify and indicate to animals to either go away or to come towards them. So even like in flowers, right? Roses have loads of terpenes that they give out, and those are the floral things that you smell in roses and in wine. I think the fun thing is most terpenes are bound to a sugar molecule. So during fermentation, when your yeast is eating your sugar, it's also cleaving a little bit of a terpene off, whatever terpene that might be, and then suddenly after fermentation you can smell the thing. So it's really cool, you know, when you smell a grape and you're like, why does that not smell like wine? One reason would be bound terpenes suddenly becoming unbound after fermentation, and then you can smell the stuff.
Oh, that's a great description. That is great. As you can tell, we're already 6 feet under the earth
Yeah,
here.
we're in the thick of it.
But exactly. Oh my goodness. So it probably shouldn't come as a surprise to people, but you mentioned the introduction of your book. Your journey began with mechanical engineering at the University College of London. How did your background in engineering shape your approach to understanding wine? We're already getting a taste of it. You're analytical, you're scientific, you're methodical. But is there something more in terms of what mechanical engineering did or gave to you with wine?
I don't think I realized how much of an engineer I was until I got into wine. So during engineering, I really did not enjoy doing that degree. I finished it just because I wanted to get it done, over with, and then onwards and upwards. So when I got into wine, I had been in hospitality for quite some time, and a lot of it didn't make sense. And then I'm like, hold up here, there's got to be a better way to learn this, because especially in hospitality, it's quite anecdotal learning. Like somebody, a head sommelier or sommeliers, are teaching you stuff that they know, and they might be teaching you stuff that they were told by somebody else. Huge, I guess, prepositions for inaccuracies that are told. It's sort of like pass me down information. And then I was thinking, okay, like I want to learn more about this. I did my wine studies and I still didn't understand any of the why. So then my inner engineer was like, hey, why don't I understand if any of this is accurate or true or not? Because I'm just learning stuff for the sake of learning. Sort of a rote learning style approach to understanding wine. So only when I really wanted to understand wine, and in hospitality, it was my weakness for quite some time, did my engineer hat on, and then I was like, okay, let me start to take this apart. And I think the one thing that truly shaped the way that I work in wine is an engineer's ability to take apart, I don't know, a car, a clock or a watch, and in this case wine, understand all the different components, because your engineer who's making a car didn't make the button. He doesn't know, he's not a rubber expert for tires, but he can pull all of those sciences together and then make that understood, and then possibly make it more efficient. And in my case, help other people understand the really intangible, misunderstood subjects. So I think personally, I like understanding stuff. I like taking stuff apart and putting it back together. I don't need to be a soil scientist or a neurological expert to understand how it all works and then tie it together. Because I think if you pigeonhole yourself in one direction, that's where you'll stay, and you won't be able to understand the bigger picture.
That's great. Wow. Okay. And then before we just dive into the Cynic's Guide to Wine, I did mention your mother was an Olympic athlete. That's incredible. She was also a single mother raising you. How did she impact you? Maybe not as a direct relation to wine, but what was her legacy to you?
So growing up, it was just me and mum, and she was my role model. She was everything, and I think thinking back, her, I guess, moral guidance was everything. Mum was really, really honest, and we were both quite honest with each other. So as strong as I saw her as this, little boy growing up, not really understanding everything, how it works, she was quite vulnerable and honest at in terms of her emotions and what she could do, what she couldn't do, what we could afford, what we couldn't afford. So I think having those conversations were really key to me, I guess, raising a team and operating 2 wine bars and also interacting with the rest of the world. We both had very little ego, and we just appreciated what we had rather than just thinking, oh, I want this, I want this, I want this. She gave me full freedom to do whatever I wanted. I didn't have to check in. And I think when you're given that much freedom at an early age, it does teach you responsibility quite quickly. And when you've only got one person in the world that's going to support you, then you realize that they're really important, and I didn't really want to piss her off.
That's great. Good for early staff training. Okay.
There you go.
So your wonderful, wonderful book, The Cynic's Guide to Wine, takes a scientifically rigorous approach to explaining wine. Was there a specific, you talked about the sort of received wisdom people sort of hand down from one person to the other in terms of teaching about wine. Was there a specific piece of wine BS or romance that kind of you questioned or thought that can't be right, or you later discovered wasn't right, that maybe triggered the desire to write this book?
I think most soil chat on soil, unless it's technical soil science stuff, I think a lot of it didn't make sense to me. And then only by understanding how roots work in all plants can you start to dissect if the wine soil stuff does make any sense in terms of how that impacts your wine and its flavor. So soil was the first thing that really, really stood out to me as, hey, is this true? Is that accurate?
Right. So you literally started at the ground up. Okay, and we're going to get there momentarily. But what was the most surprising insight you discovered while writing the book?
I think as a whole, it was I started writing the book to help me remember all of it, because it's quite dense. There's so much information there, and I found it was really fun to build those connections as you go. But I think my biggest learning from the book is how little across the spectrum a lot of us in wine understand technically about the subject. And a small example is yeast autolysis. We all may not have heard of that term before. It's the process that gives champagnes and traditional method wines their real bready, yeasty, what we would call autolytic flavor. We're all used to saying it, but who knows what it is? Actually, what is autolysis?
And what is it? Can you define it in a sentence or two?
So autolysis is when a
Yeah.
yeast
Yeah.
thinks it's going to die. It's not in a great place and it's pretty stressed. So what it'll do is it'll go on this like kamikaze mission to self-detonate, essentially. And your yeast is made up of loads of little enzymes, and there's like a cell membrane. So if you have a style of fermentation that's stressed, or as alcohol levels pick up, and your yeast knows it's going to, pass away soon, its enzymes will switch on to a different mode, and this is your autolysis mode. They'll start eating away at the cell membrane of the yeast, and eventually they'll make little puncture holes, and all of your insides of your yeast will end up within your liquid. Normally, yeast keeps its insides in, like most of us, right? So that self-detonation of yeast in stressful environments is what gives the physical texture to your wine. Like that's why autolytic wines have that texture, and it gives you those yeasty, bready flavors because you're essentially drinking yeast guts.
And as it eats away at the yeast and sort of shreds itself, is that what we call the lees? Lees?
Yeah, so lees are another term for dead yeast, and autolysis is a name for that process. So like
Process, okay.
traditional wines would have gone through some form of yeast autolysis. The dead yeast you would call lees.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. What was the most difficult part of writing this book?
It was tricky to make it accessible. Like, some pretty complex science in there. I enjoy it. I think what was fun for me is to sort of check its proof of concept in service at the bars. So like at the bars, I can talk to guests about specific technical aspects of wine and see if they cared about it or not. And that's a really good gauge because my readership is normal wine people, not wine experts. So that was really fun to check whether concepts were interesting or not. But I think the trickiest thing was then to articulate that in words and to make it interesting, because not everyone's into science. So to make it really accessible was one of the trickiest things. There are scientific orators like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Cox, who I listen to them and I'm in awe. I'm like, oh my goodness, how did you break down all this astrological awe so easily and make it so interesting? So I'm hinging on their every word thinking, oh my goodness, how do you guys do it? So I think expressing that in the book, making science accessible and making it interesting was one of the trickiest things that I was hyper focused on, and I hope I did a good job at it.
You definitely did succeed. So, I was just gripped by it, and I dropped chemistry in grade 11, and then what was next to go? I forget. Physics in grade 12. So, thank you for bringing me back through it was great writing, good storytelling.
Thank you.
So,
Yay.
You are currently at Aspen and Meursault. That's your second wine bar, but your first wine bar was, and still is a going concern, it's called Diogenes the Dog in London.
Yeah.
And you opened that in 2018. So let's talk about the unusual name you selected. I'm just going to give a slight background because I had to look this up myself. It refers to Diogenes, the ancient Greek philosopher who was one of the founders of the Cynic philosophy that challenged social norms. He was known for his unconventional behavior, such as living in a large ceramic bowl or barrel in the marketplace of Athens, and he was famous for carrying a lamp in daylight, claiming to be looking for an honest man. Diogenes embraced the nickname the Dog, given to him by his critics. Cynic in Greek means dog-like, so that all fits with your approach, etc. However, cynicism, as you know, has some negative connotations of believing that people are motivated purely by self-interest. So how does that sort of go together, mesh with wine that celebrates the pleasures of life and the generosity of spirit and sharing it with others?
Yeah, the term cynicism
Long-winded question.
It is. No, but it's a good question. Cynicism, as a word, its meaning has evolved over time. When I pitch cynicism at the bar and in the Cynic's Guide to Wine, I mean the original understanding of the philosophical movement and the original way the word was used. So that is literally just about questioning. Diogenes questioned everything. He questioned his politics around him, why people did certain things, why his nation was going to war. He questioned other philosophers. And in the same way, if we don't question stuff, we just take it for granted and assume that's how it works. And I think it is something as old school as wine that hasn't really had a shake-up. We have to put our cynical hat on in the old sense of the term and start thinking, is all of this accurate? How do we reform how we talk about this to make it better understood and for us to understand those concepts, actually?
Great. Okay. So that satisfies that one now. How does cynicism mesh with your focus on natural wines at your wine bars? When natural wines have no definition or regulation, as you know, they seem to defy science, and they often receive the most skepticism or cynicism from both industry folks and consumers. So how does that all fit for you?
Well, I'm a huge fan of natural wine personally. I think I'm always very careful about my personal opinions on things, especially wine things, versus like the science chat that I'm trying to put forwards. Huge fan of natural wines myself, and I think the one thing that natural wine has done, which is why I'm a massive fan, is make it question how we farm and how we produce all food and drink, not just wine. It's, of all food products, wine is one that we can talk about and have a real discourse without it getting like too boring too quickly. People have time for wine. Compare that to potatoes and cabbage. We're not going to sit around the dinner table talking about different types of potatoes and this potato that I tried in this other restaurant one day. So already with wine, you have this discourse and you've got this time to speak about bigger topics and bigger subjects. And with natural wine, those bigger topics and subjects are, how do we farm? What are the pros and cons of how we farm now? And how are we making our food and drink? Like when we talk about wine, we rarely talk about the nitty gritty of farming and production, but then that's how your wine came about. So I love natural wines for that same cynical questioning approach. Like it really challenges the food and the drink that we're bringing to the table.
That's great. That I never looked at it that way, but you're right. And natural wine is, despite the lack of definitions, most people will just say it's it's the least interventionist. We're trying to let nature express itself, terroir, etc. But the other thing that happens with natural wines, when I'm at least in a wine bar and I order one, it's the wine most likely to make me go, "What's this?"
Yeah.
Like it begs the question in the glass, as opposed to your commercial large scale Cabernet. There's nothing wrong with that when that's what you want. But a glass of natural wine, often you'll get some unusual flavors and aromas, and it's a wine that asks a question and makes you want to learn more if you're the curious type. So
yeah.
I can see that going together with cynicism as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of the associated funk, which is what I assume you're touching on there, you've got to think like, where's that from? And then as soon as you realize where that might be from, you're like, oh, okay, so those are normally killed in conventional wines by the addition of, I don't know, sulfites or whatever it may be. And I'm not saying sulfites are bad, but I'm like, they're normally killed in normal wines. But then you got to think like, how did we make wine back in the day before the technology that we had? And we've had sulfite for a long time, but there are many means of wine production and wine farming that we didn't do back in the day. And we're talking about prize vintages of wines that we all loved and were renowned. I'm making a huge assumption most of those are natural wines because we didn't have the tech that we do now to produce conventional wines.
Absolutely. And when I was referring to the smell and taste of natural wines, I wasn't thinking of just the funk, but just that it has such a wide range of unusual flavors and aromas. Yeah. Some I like, some I don't. But funk and funky is often a word that people will use to describe natural wines when they don't know how else to describe it, especially. But what does funky mean to you? Or is it a broad category of this is just something I like, this unusual? How would you tell someone what funky smells like in a wine?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think operating in a natural wine bar or in any wine bar, anything the guest gives at me, I'm in detective mode. Like, even if it's common terms like dry, there are so many different ways to dissect what that might mean. Like me and you would associate dryness with just sugar levels in a wine, but then your guest who's sitting in front of you might associate it with tannins. Like maybe it gives them a real drying feel. So like I think with everything that is said, regardless of the funk, it needs to be taken with a pinch of salt when you're talking just to regular people who enjoy their wine, to dissect it and think, what is it that they're talking about? For me, the funk would either be a little mix of Brettanomyces, which is, I guess, like the cousin yeast to Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is our normal winemaking yeast, which gives some pretty farmyardy, sometimes like sticking plaster, medicinal...
Cow patty. Yeah.
Precisely. It can give this farmy medicinal aromas, which most people are not used to in wine. And
Okay.
of course, if there's lots of it, it's pretty rough. Or it could be volatile acidity, maybe a little bit too much acetic acid in your wine, which sort of lifts all those aromas. So like, for me, it's a mix. It could be a mix of the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when I first started drinking wine, before I ever had a thought about writing about it, I would hear about dry wine. I'd think, well, all wine is wet. What do you mean by dry wine? Anyway, it's just like, what a weird term to describe. Like, this is a very dry milk. Anyway,
Precisely.
So you have a wildly wide-ranging wine list with your selections at your wine bars, as you've described, from Taiwan to Texas. And I believe you might even have something from Canada in there. So how do you scope out your new wines for your list? I mean, I'm sure you're taking tasting trips and you're tasting a lot at home, but is there a technique or a tip or something that you use to try to find the unusual wines to put on your list?
So with difficulty, as a sort of one-liner, how do I source? Also, operating hospitality joints, I'm on the floor a healthy amount. Getting out of the bar and into other countries is pretty tricky. And every wine that I source will have a completely different story. The Texan wine was me moving a Harley Davidson from Houston, Texas to Colorado Springs, and then I hit up all the wineries that we can go on the way to, because I knew that I wanted to bring in Texan wine. I just didn't know any, and no one's bringing it into Europe. So that was how we found Messina Hoff, like our Texan winery that we work with. The Taiwanese wine that we bring in, I was judging with a lady called Leona de Pasquale for the IWSC, and she's like an expert in Asian wines, and I sell a lot of Asian wines. So she introduced me to Clara from Waitstone Winery, and that was just because she knew that I would be into it and I'd bring it into the country and we'll represent them really well. So every wine has a completely different story. I think tips on trying wine as a whole is be open-minded. I feel that like I have I would call it like a Buddhist mindset on life, and I'm not religious in any way or form, but I think I'm open-minded enough to think, is this good and enjoyable, and not just for me? So I think when I'm tasting, I always have my commercial hat on and think, who's going to like that? How will my team get engaged, and what will they talk about when it comes to that? And it's as simple as that, because when you're choosing for wine bars or restaurants, all you're thinking is, are people going to be into this at that price point? And how are my team going to deliver that? Like, you've got to think, what are they going to talk about? What are the exciting, interesting scientific points or nuanced storytelling that they're going to speak about to deliver that to the table? If it's about you just trying new things, you got to be open-minded. What we like and dislike is great, but we don't like and dislike those things every single day. I like pancakes. I don't want to eat pancakes every day. So I think knowing and being open-minded that you'll come to expect and enjoy things later down the line that you don't enjoy immediately is really important to just being open-minded about food and drink.
Absolutely. It's literally an acquired taste. Like, you develop a taste over time for some things. All right, let's dig down into the soil. So you start with the soil. Your book is very methodically organized, soil, and then you progress up from there. But I love this because I never read about or heard about some of the stuff you're talking about. So you make a really compelling point that we rarely credit humus, Humus, and I'm not talking about Tabulian hummus, but that with influencing wine character. So humus, or is it humus? Am I pronouncing this right? Just right off the bat.
I say humus.
What is it?
I say humus.
Humus. Okay, humus. Humus. All right. Is the organic matter in soil created by microbes as they break down plant and animal matter. And you can stop me anytime if I'm saying something incorrect here. So how does that contribute to vine health? It's breaking down the plant and animal matter. Is it making it more digestible, take-upable by the vine roots? Is that what it's doing, humus?
Yeah, so I mean, as you explained, humus is just like decaying organic matter. That's all it is. But we've been using humus for 12,000 years of agriculture, right? We've been throwing cow poo on soil. We've been putting dead leaves, back on our plants, whatever they may be, to help them grow. So I think when you look at how soil works, a lot of what we talk about in wine is geology. And of all of the geological materials, like rocks that are in the soil, clays tend to hold what's called the highest cation exchange capacity, which is essentially a unit of fertility. But even of the most fertile of
can I just stop you there for a minute?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just stop you there? Okay.
Tell me.
First of all, did you say cation or cation? 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 Because we need to talk about that.
I think the British is cation, and then the American Canadian would be cation.
Cation, okay.
Yeah.
Because you've slipped it in there, so we should define it, because and we'll come back to what we were just talking about, but if I understand correctly, cation exchange is how plants obtain nutrients from the soil. Cations are positively charged ions in the soil, so the plant roots are absorbing that. Is that correct? What that is, a cation and a cation exchange?
Yeah, so cation exchange or cation exchange is a huge topic to unpack. But what I may do, if it's cool with you, I'll finish off our humus and then I'll come straight back to cation exchange. So think of cation exchange.
It's hard to know which layer to go with first.
It's really tricky because it's nature. And there's no systems in nature, and it's all biology. So it's really complex. But simplistically, cation exchange is our unit of soil fertility. Of all of the rocks that exist, clay has the most fertile. Humus, which is just decaying matter, is way more fertile than all of the stuff that we're talking about, than all of the clays and stuff like that. It also is really porous and is perfect for our soils to allow an environment that allows cation exchange to happen and for bacteria and microbes to grow. And it's also full of nitrogen, which your soils can get themselves, but in conventional farming they tend to struggle to get nitrogen from the soil, so you have to add it by synthetic fertilizers. So humus is like the trifactor of gold on soils, and I would say it's way more important than a lot of the geology that we talk about. So I think that's why I put importance on humus. Going back to cation exchange or cation exchange, it's a really big process to unpack, so at risk of boring you, I'll speed it up a little bit. So essentially, a cation is a positive ion. Cations, most of them, enter the soil from above. So when you've got a rock above the soil or a tree, and when that's broken down by nature, erosion, those cations enter the water supply, they hit the water table underneath the earth, and now underneath your soils you have water, mineral water, full of cation minerals and cation ions. Now, for any plant, a cation that has a benefit to the plant is called a nutrient. So we can think of cations just simplistically as nutrients, that you can use them interchangeably.
Okay.
Our roots for all plants have a system, because they can't really move that quickly, and there's cations everywhere. They're like moving around really, really quickly in the soil water. So our roots need a way to get those cations that they need, because those are the nutrients in the soil. So simplistically, when you have rocks in soil, they tend to have a negative surrounding, like a negative charge around them, and they attract loads of different cations. And those cations in the soil water, we're talking magnets here, right? So you've got positive charged ion, negative charged rock. They now, like a magnet, come together. If a stronger charged cation comes by, that will now displace the other cation. And now that cation is free in the soil water. If there's a tiny, tiny, tiny cation that comes by, it is physically closer to the surface of that rock. And just like two magnets, when you put them together, if they're very, very close, they'll want to sort of slap together really, really quickly. So the hierarchy of what cations get attracted to rocks are based on two factors. Number one, the charge of that cation, how highly charged is that cation? And number two is the size of the cation. How small is it? Smaller stuff will be closer to the surface and will get attracted. All plants now have a problem in their hands. They're like, okay, so we've got rocks that are surrounded by cations, our roots, which are super, super slow to get there. How do we pry those cations off those rocks? And the beauty of nature here is our plants can synthesize hydrogen ions, and hydrogen ions on that hierarchy, that pyramid of cations of what's most likely to get attracted to a rock. Hydrogen ions are at the top of that pyramid. They're a proton inside, so the tiniest little cations. And because they're so teeny tiny, the tiniest of the lot, they are the strongest attracting cation around. So they're the top dog cation that will always displace other cations on a rock, other nutrients on a rock. So our plants, through photosynthesizing, they take in water, they draw in water from the roots, which is H2O. Photosynthesis means that they take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. So now you've got a free hydrogen to play around with. If the plant wants, it can sense a rock that's got, loads of free cations, loads of nutrients, and it'll release those hydrogens. Those hydrogens will get attracted to your rock because they're super, super highly charged, so the top dog cation, and that'll free up loads of nutrients in that moment for the plant to take up. So plants have a way of concentrating the soil water around them to be really, really rich in nutrients, and then they'll take them up. So understanding that helps you understand how rocks affect your vines, and also what vines physically take up. They're not taking that rock. They're taking the random array of nutrients that surround that rock, but they're not taking that rock.
Right, because they can't synthesize rocks and minerals. They need organic matter to take up.
They need cations to take up, and cations are teeny tiny, but the rock is too big. So once you understand that mechanism, then you can get your head around, do rocks directly make a difference to the flavor of our wine, or is the mineral composition of our soil water more important than the rock itself?
Yeah, because we talk about, we all in the industry, as you know, and you really go after this myth in your book, that the industry focuses on geology rocks rather than the organic matter and the microbes, etc. When we talk about terroir, which is sort of that elusive French term, combination of soil, climate, winemaking decisions that give wine its character. So you're saying it's not about the rocks and the geology primarily, it's about the organic matter, the humus and these microbes and these cations, which are nutrients, organic matter, right? It's that gives the wine its character.
I'd be a little careful there, because now what we're talking about is rocks do play a part, and if you read the first few chapters of the book, you'll completely understand how all of the different types of rocks make a difference. Limestones, clays. I can talk about it for hours, but also, again, at risk of just making this a soil science chat. It's worth reading the book just to understand what the different rocks do to vines and to soil and how they make a difference, because that's really useful stuff. I mean, let's not talk about limestone unless we know what it does. But I think
Right.
all of the nutrients has a impact on your vine in terms of vine health when it needs it or not. But the step between do you have a healthy vine that has everything that it needs to perform, and the step between there and wine characteristics has many interactions that could affect that. There are some cations that have a direct effect on wine characteristics, and some cations that will have no effect on vine characteristics, but they might make for really healthy plants and help your plants grow and help your plants survive the next year or whatever it may be, but that may not affect your wine. Because
Right.
I think in wine and
Right.
understanding vines holistically, we're only focused on how does it affect your wine, less so than is your vine healthy, because they're two different things technically.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of vitamins. Some vitamins are good for your skin, hair, nails, and others just,
Yeah.
overall, whatever, cardiovascular health or whatever. Okay,
Yeah.
so people need to go to that section of the book because I'm even sort of mucking it about, but because we're just trying to distill this down in a very limited time. But why do you think the wine industry has focused so much on just the geology and the rocks and talking about soil drainage? Because, we want the vines to suffer because, then they go into survival mode. They put all their nutrients into the grapes. Those get concentrated, therefore concentrated wine. Why have we focused so much on purely the geology and rocks and not on these other aspects of the organic matter?
So wine has been around for such a long time, and we prized certain wines. Like there are some appellations that have been around forever. We're talking like Champagne, Chardonnay de Pape, but those really, really premium wines, they were selling for a good amount. Someone made good money off those wines back in the day, but they predate germ theory. We were drinking and enjoying expensive wines, premium wines, before we even understood what yeast was. For a long, long time, we were making wines and thinking yeast was a chemical. We couldn't even, the idea of fermentation, the term fervere means to boil, so we just thought it was a sort of magic component that would boil our wines, our grape juice and turn it into wine. So we sold wine as a premium product, or many wines as a premium product, before we even understood what it was. And when stuff happens pre-science, it's magic, right? Like, we don't get it. We can sell it. We can say that it's really, really tasty, but it might as well be magic. And then you're just looking at stuff that you think, however way you want to look at it. Yeah, but I think there comes a time where the science comes about, and then you're like, okay, what we understood before isn't technically accurate. And your question was like, why do we rely on geology? Geology is the most visible differentiating factor between vineyards. You have your vineyards, you're growing your wine, and you think, why is your vineyard different from mine? This is at a time before we understood what microbes were. This is a time before we understood what yeast was. We didn't have the chemical analysis to understand what affected what. And you're like, okay, you have lots of this soft clay soil, and you have lots of this limestone. Let's draw up a border based on the things that we can see, because we can physically see that. And then we'll set our wine laws around that, and we'll talk about those things. I think the huge issue is we're still talking in that way now. And the science has come about in wine, but we're still talking in that same parlance, which does make sense because nothing's really shaken it up enough to be like, hey, should we be saying that? And I think the Cynic's Guide to Wine is the first huge book that's come about to really challenge the way that we talk about wine.
Indeed, it is. And just to your point, like you're talking about this already, but the Kimmeridgian soils of Chablis in France are often credited with imparting oceanic or saline qualities to wines. The soil is rich in both limestone and clay, as you've said, that originated during the Jurassic period 150 million years ago. So it's known for its mineral content and fossilized oysters and other marine life.
Yeah.
But you're skeptical about that as well, right?
I would say less skeptical, and I would say firmly, there's no link. I think in understanding Cation,
okay.
yeah, because I think skepticism comes with, I'm not too sure about it, but I'm pretty sure about it. So
Okay.
even understanding Cation exchange, like as we've explained it, we know that the rock, let's call it a fossil for now. We know that limestone, that fossil, has no direct sort of correlation with your vine. It's just surrounded by nutrients, which the vine takes up. But I think, so even understanding Cation exchange simplistically debunks the idea that we're actually tasting that fossil. And that fossil, in the case of Chablis, is like mineralized oysters or fossilized oysters. But then when you understand and when you look at what a fossil is, a fossil doesn't have that oyster in it. A fossil is,
Right.
A dinosaur, an old tree, shells, oyster shells that has had sediment rested upon it. The sediment over time compacts, pressurizes, and now you essentially have a rock cast over that fossil, over that oyster shell. So now you've got the oyster shell covered in the rock cast. The oyster shell or the dinosaur or whatever it may be erodes away and just dissipates in time, and then you're just left with the rock cask. So if we're saying that the fossilized oyster shell makes our wines taste like the sea, that fossilized oyster shell is exactly the same or similar material to a fossilized dinosaur shell or like a tree, a fossilized plant, or so even the fossil itself is not, it's just the cast of the original thing.
Right.
So it can't taste like that original thing because the original thing's not there anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I'm going to jump now because I want to get through some of these other aspects of your book. They're just mind-blowing, literally. You devote significant space to the story of the German scientist and Nobel Prize winner Fritz Haber, whose work on adding more nitrogen to the soil, more nutrients, led to synthetic fertilizers to help, at the time, alleviate famine and produce more food. But then he and his work were conscripted during World War I, and it was used as chemical weapons to suffocate soldiers. Can you tell us a bit more about this, or your perspective on his work, which seems to have had this sort of profoundly positive intent at the beginning and then an evil impact at the end?
Yeah, it's a really bittersweet story, and I think anyone who's listening to this who's into food and drink, like, YouTube this guy Fritz Haber. His life story is fascinating. Unless someone has done already, someone needs to make a film out of this guy. So, German Jewish scientist. He and his partner Karl Bosch created the process called the Haber-Bosch process, which essentially solved the mystery, the scientific mystery up till then, of how to get nitrogen out of the air in a soluble state that you can use for farming. So a lot of the issues back then, and we're talking sort of early World War One, like the world had many famines that surrounded and sort of a blight of the world, and they couldn't get the yields of their crops higher because their crops needed more nitrogen. Back then, high nitrogen sources like guano, which is like bird poo, were like worth a quarter of the weight of gold because people wanted them for nitrogen. Our air, as we know, is predominantly nitrogen, and everyone's thinking, oh my goodness, if we need nitrogen for our soils to increase our yields and solve world famine, and if we're surrounded by it in the air, how do we get the stuff? So the Haber-Bosch process was the process, almost like alchemy, that took nitrogen from the air and allowed us to keep it in a form that we could apply to the earth, and then plants could take up in that format. As you mentioned, later on, it was actually Haber was a huge patriot, and he went on to become head of Germany's chemical warfare department. he was also known, so he went to save the world, and then he was known to be the father of chemical warfare. He invented that that type of machinery, and a lot of his chemicals that he created, and he oversaw this, so he was a part of this as well. Had killed millions and millions of soldiers, and was a part of Zyklon B, which the Nazis took after he died and developed his chemical pesticides to be this gas that they put in the gas chambers, and killed a lot of
in the death camps.
people.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so a really really harrowing story. I think the story is something that we should all know if we're into food and drink, because it does tell the story of how we managed to get those synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. And bear in mind, we didn't have any synthetic fertilizers pre Haber-Bosch process. The world wanted it. There was starvation everywhere, and it single-handedly solved that issue. But now there are a lot of problems that come off the back of those chemicals that were created in World War I and World War II, including the full cycle of getting those pesticides that had been developed into weapons of mass destruction, and then reutilizing them in farming after the war was done. So all of those technologies that were developed in World War I and World War II, those companies, they still tick about today, right? They are still producing chemicals, not for weapons of mass destruction, but they're producing chemicals for agriculture and farming. And it's good to know what you're using, and also the negative and positive impacts that has on your soil. I'm not anti-chemical, because I think everything is a chemical, right? But I think it's useful to know what we're using and how that impacts our farming now.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also make the interesting observation that, copper is a heavy metal. It's toxic at high levels, and yet it is organic. It's not man-made. It's synthetic. So organic wine producers are permitted to use it. What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. So, chemical is a natural. Copper is a natural substance. It's naturally antimicrobial and antifungal, which is why we use it in plumbing. It's why we use it in hospitals as touchpads on doors. It naturally is very, very sanitary. It's brilliant. Because of a couple of, or more than a couple of, fungal pests, like downy and powdery mildew, which now affect vines, we spray our vines with copper-based concoctions, various different types, to prevent that fungus building up, downy or powdery mildew, which will destroy our harvests. So we spray copper as a preventative for those fungal issues. But as you mentioned, it's not just a heavy metal, not in the musical sense, but when it rains, it'll hit your soils, and then you've got all of your microbes, which we spoke about before, which are actually breaking down stuff and adding nutrients back to the soil. They all die because you've just put an antifungal, antibacterial in your canopy to stop them getting those mildew. And then when they fall to the soils, all life, and they affect earthworms and all of the things that we know to be really good for the soils, naturally, we stop our soil's ability to just look after itself. And then our soil becomes reliant on people and synthetic chemicals. It's a really tricky thing. We haven't really found a unified way to overcome downy and powdery mildew without the use of copper. It's a great preventative. It works. But I think right now there's no real obvious solution. There are farming methods that do work, but to do it on a global scale without reducing our yields and without creating more risk, it's a tricky one.
Wow. All right, let's move on to smell. Now, you say you're critical of the common practice of listing flavors in wine. First of all, I should say you make the interesting observation that in our brain, in terms of brain distance, so we're talking millimeters, but still, the center for memory, emotion, and smell is in 1.2 part of the brain, and it's pretty far away from the language processing part of our brain, Broca and Wernicke. So they're pretty far apart, and that's often why we struggle to put words to wine. We know it, we smell it, we remember where we were perhaps when we first tasted that wine, but naming the flavors is so difficult because those two parts of our brain are very far apart. And yet you've also noted that, it's a common practice to list flavors in wine, which is a challenge. If we move away from flavor descriptors, is there an alternative language or way to communicate about wine in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think there are many ways to do it. What's really tricky with I guess helping get the book out there is if there's something that's completely new and pitches to reshape how we think and talk about wine, but doesn't offer what that looks like because it's brand new stuff. We don't know how that will change our discourse. Then it's really hard to pitch. So that was one of the big issues that I had, is helping people understand what the other side of that book looks like and how that affects how we talk and speak about wine. I am a huge believer in putting the information out there, and people can make their own decisions. My part in wine, I really see as someone who has put the tools out there to help us make our own decisions. I'm very hesitant to tell people what to say and how they should say stuff. But I also, if something is inaccurate, I think we should all have the devices and the tools, like this book, to say, hey, this is actually not how it works. Maybe we should stop saying this and start saying that. I think if it was up to me, and how I speak about wine and how I train the teams to talk about wine, is to steer as clear away from the subjective stuff as possible. Flavors are important if they technically exist within that wine, and you only know if they exist in that wine if you understand where those aromatic compounds come from, which also explained in the book. But we rarely choose wines on flavor. So let's imagine you go to your local wine shop and you want a red wine. Who goes to the wine shop and says, I want a wine that smells and tastes of strawberry, please? Like, no one does that.
That's true.
No one does that. Yet
Right.
we put so much importance on the theatre of having a glass of wine and saying, and just listing off everything that you smell and taste. We rarely do that with other food and drink. So the thing that we're so used to doing is actually irrelevant to our buying decisions because we never ask for those things. You just sort of experience it. So I think that theatre, because it is theatre, like we feel the need to present it to everyone that is around us at the time. I think we need to really look at that and think, what's important to us? Is it important to do the theatre of just listing off all the aromatic compounds that you smell personally, because a lot of it, not everyone can smell what you're smelling? Or is it important to talk about what you get from that wine? I would talk more technically about it. I would like to, think about how are the tannins, how's the body of the wine, how much do you get from the oak? Has it been through malolactic fermentation? Do you get all this creamy, butteriness from lactic acid and diacetyl? So I think there needs, for me, I would like to see more technical specific parlances. If we're talking about cream, let's talk diacetyl, because that's a word that not many of us use in wine conversations. And the more we speak about it, the more your normal average wine consumers would be like, hey, what's that? Oh, cool. Let's speak about this. It's just like umami, right? Like umami was a word that was unknown to us such a long time ago. And now it's just a normal food and drink culture. So I think what I really want to see on the other side of this book is loads of new, technically concise words that we can apply to wine, and then you can use that however you wish.
Then we'll be going into our wine store and saying, I'm really looking for some diacetyl tonight.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're going to a drugstore though.
Yeah, it does. So that's the buttery flavor or aroma. What does that come from? Is that from malolactic fermentation when they change the harsh acids to softer acids?
Yeah, so it's a lactic acid bacteria that will eat malic acid, which is responsible for that
Okay.
tart, green, appley acidity in your wine. It'll eat that and then it'll convert it to lactic acid, which gives you that lactosey creaminess, gives you that viscosity. As you mentioned, it's a higher pH, so a lower acidity as a whole. So it'll drop the acidity of your wine, but also diacetyl is created as a byproduct, which gives you that that creaminess, like that really sort of cultured cream. Yeah, so it's that mix of buttery milkiness. Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's interesting. We've done an episode all on flaws and faults in wine, but I didn't know this. You point out that cork taint,
Yeah.
it's not so much that it's affecting or changing the wine, but it affects or changes our ability to smell the wine. What happens? Is it just suppressing our olfactory receptors, or what is cork taint doing to us?
So it does both. Like it has this musty, cardboardy smell. So like that musty corkiness does exist in cork taints, but in addition to that, it physically suppresses our smell receptor. So the neuronal link there, and it'll just temporarily like mute that. So then all of you, like a lot of the time when a wine is corked, we don't smell any fruit or feel any fruit on that at all, but it's because your smell receptor has just been muted temporarily, because that's what TCA does. It'll just mute that.
So it mutes it, but it also does change some aromas in the wine. So it does both things.
It does
Is that
both,
right?
Yeah. You have the
does
musty,
both.
corky
Okay.
smell, which dominates, and then it'll
Yeah.
suppress some matrix of smells, and they tend to be like the really
The fruit.
fruity, vibrant smells.
Okay, cool. And then you talk about, you mentioned that vines grown in cooler temperatures, say under 25 degrees Celsius, have more black pepper notes than those grown in warm climates, where those black pepper notes get eaten. What do you mean by that? Like, yeah, maybe you could just explain. Cooler wines, more black pepper?
Yeah, so the black pepper compound that we're talking about is a compound called sesquiterpene rotundan. We can just call it rotundan for short, but it is from the terpene family.
Okay.
So that rotundan
Okay.
is the chemical compound responsible for black pepper in black pepper as well as wines. So genetically, some varieties will have higher levels of rotundan than other varieties. The chemical compound is metabolized with heat. So when you have like temperatures over 25 degrees C, your vine will just start to, I say eat it up, but it'll metabolize it and just use it for something else. So it's like a little energy source. It's like a little battery pack. So in those hotter climates,
Okay.
it'll go from your wines, and then in your cooler below 25 degrees, it'll stay there. And I think what I find really cool about that is there are many wines where people look for that black pepper. So when you're having like a Cabernet Franc or even like a Gruner Veltliner,
Yes.
and I've done many judging panels where we've had a lineup of Gruner and someone smelt it and been like, I don't get any white pepper. It's so not on varietal. And I'm thinking, technically, it is. It's just probably from a hotter climate and the rotundan has metabolized and disappeared. Does that mean it's a lower quality? I would think not. I think, if anything, it helps you lend a sense of place, knowing if there's no white pepper in that Gruner, it must be from a place that's over 25 degrees C. But if you don't have those tools, if you don't have the whys, which is what the book is all about, then you can't start to have those conversations or
Yes.
make those decisions.
So white pepper and black pepper, I get the smell difference, but in terms of this molecule inside wine, is it on a scale where, I don't know, the climate is even cooler if you're going to get white pepper versus black pepper, or how does that express itself?
It's the same thing, because you have like white pepper, pink pepper, black pepper, like the three types of pepper, or there's more, But those are the main guys. Black pepper has been oxidized and it's gone a little bit black, and then white pepper tends to have had that black outside just shaved off. The smells are the same. Like we in wine extrapolate a little bit and think it's a white wine, so I may psychosomatically associate it with white peppery things rather than a red wine, which might be black pepper. It's exactly the same sesquiterpene rotundan. We just sort of trick ourselves into perceiving it one way rather than the other, based on the visual aspect of it. Yeah, and this happens a lot in wine. So I did a really fun exercise, a little tasting exercise with WSET. It was a masterclass touching on some topics from the book. First wine was a white wine, and I asked the room, who, they're students of wine, they know their stuff. I asked the room to help me draw up some descriptors, some flavor descriptors on the board. We're writing things like citrus and lemon and lime and grapefruit. We're writing all this stuff on the board. I ran the masterclass. We changed the subject. The flavors are still on the board. We tried some other wines. Our last wine, I did the same exercise, and it was a red wine. The flavor descriptors I get are dark cherry. We're getting like graphite. They're all flavor descriptors that you would associate with red wines. I had inoculated that second wine with color, like a food dye, anthocyanin based, and essentially the wines were the same. So it was a white
wine that you colored red.
It was the wines were the same wine, and just the visual bias that we all have completely changed our perception of that wine. And in the same way, I think with rotundan, if you got a white wine or a red wine, we will call that same aromatic compound two different things.
Right. Okay. So pink pepper must go with rosé then. But you also say that 20 to 25% of people in the population can't detect rotundan or pepper notes.
Yeah.
They just don't have the capacity to detect it. So that's interesting. Plus, you say that olfactory sense differs by 30% from person to person. So no wonder we all come up with different descriptors when we talk about
100%.
all of these differences, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And is bell pepper in that family too, or is that completely different from black pepper, the bell pepper family?
Bell pepper's something called methoxypyrazines. So it's a different family. It's not a terpene. Pyrazines for short are all responsible for that sort of vegetal green pepperiness, and rotundan is something completely different. But then also when you look at, I think within this mix-up, we're just talking about language, because they're both got pepper in them, but when you look at a bell pepper, a capsicum pepper, it's a completely different thing to a black peppercorn.
Yeah. Okay.
Hence why the chemical compounds are different.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go through a few more bits and bobs here. Why can't we smell if a wine is sweet? It's just we can't? That's the answer? Or is there anything more to it?
Yeah, so I think to understand this, we've got to look at what's an aroma. What is a smell? And an aroma is a particle that's light enough to leave whatever our source is and then travel in air to get to our nose. So any particle that is light enough to travel through air and hit our nose, and for us to pick it up, is what we call an aroma. Sugars, glucose, fructose, they tend to be quite heavy things. If you remember before when we were talking about terpenes, and we said that those terpenes were bound, glycosidically bound, it means they're attached to a heavy sugar molecule, which is why when they're freed from that sugar molecule, they can fly away, and then we can smell them. But sugar molecules are really heavy chemical compounds, and they're unable to reach our nose. And I mean, a great example is if you have a bowl of sugar, it doesn't smell like anything, and you know that it's sweet, but it has no smell. So when we do smell sweetness, let's say in inverted commas, when we smell sweetness in wine, we're smelling things that remind us of things that should be sweet psychosomatically, like, let's say, lychees or passion fruit or exotic fruits. We have this association because our mind is not really used to smelling things like fruit that actually don't taste like that. And in the case of wine, because of
Right.
fermentation, all of the associated sugars for most dry wines would have been eaten away by yeasts. So it's this disconnect between our minds thinking, this smells fruity, which is normally sweet, because fruits tend to be sweet, and that disconnect between the wine smelling like that, but not tasting sweet.
That makes sense. And by extension, usually a flat sparkling wine will taste very different from when it's bubbly, often sweeter. Is that just because the bubbles are masking or mitigating the perception of sweetness, just like flat diet or Coca-Cola will taste very sugary sweet versus carbonated?
Yeah, 100%. When I read the research papers on this, I was like, oh my goodness, mind blown. It all makes sense. I sort of had a feeling about it before, but I never saw it on paper, right? And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. So yeah, like the little CO2 bubbles in sparkling wine, they when you pop it in your mouth, they'll dissolve in your saliva, and they'll, the more you drink, they'll get backed up, and then what they do is they form a physical barrier between certain molecules hitting your tongue and your ability to taste certain things. And sugar sweetness is the first thing that'll get blocked out. So if you have a sparkling wine that has some sweetness, as your saliva builds up with bubbles, you won't perceive it. And just like you mentioned in Coca-Cola, like flat Coca-Cola is rancid sweet. It is so different from sparkling Coca-Cola, but it hasn't changed in sugar levels. It's just the bubbles aren't blocking your perception of sweetness.
Cool. And then you talk about smelling wine with short, fast sniffs versus long, slow intakes of air. And how does that change which aromas we smell?
So your sniff velocity, which is like the speed of your uptake, will change the type of aroma molecules that are absorbed into your mucosa, which will eventually hit your smell system. So heavy particles generally prefer slower, deeper sniffs because they're heavy. And if you think of it like a vacuum cleaner, if you're going over really, really quickly, you might miss the heavy bits, but if you spend your time to go slowly over it, you'll pick it up. So in exactly the same way, but sort of in reverse, slower, steady sniffs will pick up weightier particles. And when I'm talking weightier particles, diacetals, which we spoke about before, that milky sort of cultured butteriness, that's quite a heavy particle. Yep. Yeah, so slow, deliberate sniffs will pick up more diacetyl in wine than really, really quick and then out sniffs.
What will the quick sniffs get?
Tend to be the more volatile aromas, so the things that hit your nose quicker. So things like esters, which are responsible for really fruity aromas, you'll get quicker. Anything off the back of acetic acid, so that volatile acidity and things like that, you'll get really, really quickly. Okay. It's really cool to get your head around, and then now I guess all you got to do is dissect the aroma compounds and realize which ones are heavy and which ones are lighter.
Yeah, I'm going to try that tonight at dinner. Try some short sniffs and long sniffs, and my husband's going to wonder, what are you doing? But anyway.
You think you're having an asthma attack.
Yeah, that's right. I need a defibrillator over here. And you mentioned that we're 400 times more sensitive to bitter than sweet. Why is that?
So from an evolutionary perspective, we have such a heightened sensitivity to bitterness. So in nature, most bitter things we're actually not tuned up to enjoy. In addition to that, a lot of bitter things in nature. So imagine when we were cave people and just eating whatever we found. We were taking huge risks in what we were eating, but in the name of nutrition. So possibly worth it. But a lot of the bitter compounds tended to be toxins or poisonous. So our Darwinian way of evolution was to make sure that we were hyper sensitive to it. So the bitterness we actually taste. So we needed to know, and by the time you're tasting it, that thing's in your mouth, right? It could be too late. A second later, and you would have, you could have died. So our bitter taste receptors need to be super, super sharp and an almost knee-jerk reaction to us spitting the thing out. So that's why our bitter receptors are so much and so in tune.
That's great. And then finally, just on this section, how does ice open up whiskey? What's happening with the molecules? Because I would just a straight on, not thinking about it approach would be like, okay, it's just going to dilute down the smell of the whiskey, but instead it opens it up. What's happening there?
Yeah, and I think as well, intuitively, I would think if you're putting ice in whiskey, it'll cool the thing down, so your molecules would be less volatile, right? The colder stuff is, the less it smells. So intuitively, it doesn't make any sense why adding ice to whiskey completely opens it up. But when you look at aroma compounds within a medium, like a liquid, some of them enjoy being in certain types of liquids and some of them do not. So all of your aroma compounds across the board will tend to have a preference between fats, water, and alcohols. And what's really cool is when you know certain aromas sit within them better than others, it explains why cooking the same stuff in different ways completely changes their flavor. So think of if you have a steak and you fry it in fat, it tastes different from when you boil that steak, and that will taste really, really different if you cooked it in various different ways. A lot of it is to do with the cooking process, but that medium that you're cooking it in will encourage certain aromas to stick within it because they sit better within those environments, and certain ones to dissipate, and then you'll smell them. So specifically within your whiskey, certain aroma compounds are sitting in your alcoholic solution really, really nicely. They're loving it. As soon as you add your ice, your water concentration increases, and those molecules are like, oh no, I don't like it here anymore. You call them hydrophilic particles. So those hydrophilic particles will suddenly dissipate and think, I want to get out of here. And then you can smell them, which is really, really cool. And I think some really
That is super cool.
Yeah, some cool examples of hydrophilic whiskey compounds are like glycol, which is responsible for smoky smells and flavors, which also exists in wine. So like in theory, if you add an ice cube to your whiskey, if it has glycol in it from various different whiskey making processes, you should pick up a bit more of that smoky glycol. Vanillin as well. So the aroma compound that's directly responsible for vanilla flavors and smells. Vanillin is hydrophilic. So I lie, hydrophobic is a term for something that doesn't like water. That will escape really, really quickly. So yeah, that'll completely change. And go back to wine. Imagine how alcohol levels in your wine will directly influence the smell and flavor of your wine, because all of those alcohol-loving wines and those water-loving wines will completely, loving aroma compounds will completely change depending on your wine.
Wow. Mind blown. Oh my gosh. Sunny, this has been a fascinating discussion. I wish I could keep going, but both of us have to have dinner at some point. But your book is amazing, truly. I got to listen to it again. I tend to I put it into Adobe Acrobat and then I listened to it since I couldn't find there's the book. Okay, yes. The Cynic's Guide to Wine. There it is. And so I would suggest people go out and buy it. Of course, you can win one of 2 copies if you email me. But is there anything we haven't covered, Sunny, well, of course, there's tons we haven't covered, but is there anything you want to mention before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered a lot. I want to thank you for your time, and also your questions were incredible. And if you think about it, this is a book about really questioning what we understand in wine and food and drink as a whole. So I think you are completely on brand, Natalie. The inner cynic lives within you.
You've deputized me to be an honorable cynic or whatever, an honorary cynic. And where can we find the book and you?
So you can find me predominantly in my bars. The book is available
Yes.
online. It's worth Googling. I think different countries are stocking it in different places. Amazon, the behemoth of Amazon, definitely stocks it, and I think that might be the quickest and easiest way to get your hands on it. I know it'll be in bookshops, but in the States and Canada, my understanding of literary outlets is not sharp. So Google the Cynic's Guide to Wine, and you'll definitely be able to find it somewhere.
Yeah, Amazon has country stores in just about everywhere, whether it's Canada, US, UK, etc. We have chapters Indigo, so it'll probably get into that system. Barnes and Noble maybe in the States, and then it's published by Académie du Vin, which has its own website. We'll put all these links in the show notes so that you can find it and order it no matter where you're at. Sunny, thank you so much for the time and the intelligence and stories that you've shared with us, and for clearing up a lot of those wine myths. I'm jazzed. I feel like I can be the smart one now at a dinner party going, did you know? And that's, it's just, you've sparked a whole new, I think, way to think about wine. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time on the show. And I'm glad you enjoy the read.
Oh, excellent. I just got to go back and do it again. Straighten out what I mixed up.
No.
Okay, I'll say goodbye for now. But Sunny, don't log off, but thank you again. And cheers.
Ciao.
Okay,
Thank you for having me.
Ciao.